Hey everyone, welcome to episode 29 of Trucksafe Live, the show where we and our guest tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon with Trucksafe and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting-edge safety programs. Today we're talking about DataQs, so if you are a nerd like me and my guest today and you follow DOT safety and compliance news, then you're undoubtedly aware of the news from late last week, FMCSA publishing a notice about the potential changes to the DataQs system and an independent appeals board that they are thinking about standing up. So it would be a big change if that were to take effect. So we're going to talk about that today. I got a couple of great guests, good friends on with me today. Before we get there, a few things going on. Last chance to join us in Orlando, Florida, October 12th and 13th. If you want to join us for our Fleet Compliance Boot Camp, we've sold out once and we opened up a few additional seats. So we've got like 1 or 2 seats left for this. This is our 2-day conference where we dig deep into DOT regulations and talk about best practices for managing an effective fleet safety and compliance program. So, like I said, October 12th and 13th in Orlando, Florida. If you want to join us, you can check out the details over at trucksafebootcamp.com. We hope to see you there. If you're not a member of our Trucksafe Fleet Compliance Network, I recommend you join that. This is our online social network for fleet safety professionals to gather together, learn from one another, ask questions, and also have access to all of our DOT-related content, our articles, our videos, our podcast. You can check that out over at trucksafenetwork.com. We've also got an app in the App Store and the Google Play Store that you can find just by searching Trucksafe in those app stores, and you'll find it. So we hope to see you there. And then lastly, Trucksafe related, I would just encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter if you're not already, trucksafe.com/subscribe. We are sending out pretty regular newsletters breaking down all of the regulatory related news that comes out, some research articles on meal and rest break changes, safety rating, potential changes to the safety rating methodology, changes to the SMS. There's a lot going on right now in the DOT regulatory world. So we've kind of got articles on all of those topics, and the best way to keep up to date on that and everything else we got going on at Trucksafe is through our newsletter. Again, trucksafe.com/subscribe. A couple things going on in the industry, safety and compliance related, that are worth mentioning before we dig into today's topic. I saw a couple of articles this week. First up, FMCSA has announced $80 million in grant awards, including a 65% increase in funding for truck parking projects across the U.S. Much needed investment, most would say. According to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, there are countless ways to thank America's hardworking truck drivers during National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. We are doing so by addressing a serious issue that consistently ranks as one of their highest concerns. Chris Spear, ATA President and CEO, added that the funding being announced will help to alleviate a shortage of truck driving spaces that too often puts drivers in a no-win situation. So hopefully that will manifest itself into additional parking. Frankly, it's probably just a drop in the bucket, but something is better than nothing, obviously. So hopefully that gets put to good use and we start to see this issue being taken care of sooner rather than later. All right, second up, Government Accountability Office. This was an interesting article I read this week. The Federal Government Accountability Office, GAO, issued a report where they are telling FMCSA that the agency needs to release carrier complaint data. They say specifically FMCSA does not make public any information on complaints against truck companies, bus companies, or electronic logging device providers. As a result, FMCSA may be missing the opportunity to improve transparency and collaboration with industry partners. So that's an interesting slap on the wrist from the GAO to FMCSA about kind of their complaint hotline or website that they have available. This is where anybody can go and lodge a complaint usually against trucking companies. And this is what we see. This is the database that we see sometimes prompts a DOT audit. Sometimes drivers go in there, file a complaint about their motor carrier. Carrier XYZ forced me to violate the hours of service rules and drive beyond my limits, and sometimes those complaints will be investigated and then could lead to an audit for that particular carrier. But to date, those complaints are not made public for everyone to see. They are just investigated by FMCSA. So the GAO is weighing in here saying that they think that the FMCSA needs to make those complaints public. So just thought that was an interesting read. Not sure if that's going to go anywhere. If I had to guess, probably not. That would be my best guess. There's probably not going to be any action taken on that recommendation based on past experience with these types of things. But we'll just wait and see. Anyway, all right, that's enough about us, enough about other topics. Let's segue into today's topic, which again is the future of the DataQs system. As I mentioned late last week, which is mid-September 2023, if you're watching later, the FMCSA surprised us a bit by issuing a notice of its intention to stand up some type of an independent appeals board to review DataQs appeals filed by carriers, drivers, or other stakeholders that get denied in their initial reviews. We and others in the industry have long criticized this DataQs system as a poor substitute for due process, as most appeals filed through that system are reviewed and ruled on by the very same agency and often the same officer that wrote the violations to begin with. Obviously, a little bias there, to say the least. This is particularly a timely topic now with talks underway by FMCSA to potentially tie a motor carrier's safety rating to its roadside inspection data. That was the topic of our last Trucksafe live show. If you missed that, be sure to check that out. So anyway, today we're talking about the FMCSA's recent notice of its intention to stand up some kind of an independent appeals board for the DataQs system. I'm excited to be joined once again by a couple of good friends, compliance gurus, Mr. Brian Runnels, VP of Safety for Reliance Partners, and Rob Carpenter, owner of Carpenter Compliance. Welcome, guys.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Doing all right. Rob, is your mic working? Nope, it's not working. You're gonna have to figure that out.
Come on, Rob.
Brian's gonna have to steal the show here.
I think we're good.
There we go. We're good.
It's this fancy Mackie thing that I don't know how to use. So
causing you trouble.
It's always
well, hey, thanks, guys. Really appreciate you joining me, as always. These guys have all been on a few past episodes with me, so go back and check out those prior episodes. We've talked about a lot of different compliance-related topics. Today we are talking about DataQs. Oh, by the way, both these guys are going to be at our boot camp. They're going to be talking on different topics, so they're going to be with us down there in Orlando. You guys all ready to go for that trip?
Yep, I am.
I'm ready to go.
Can't wait.
Orlando's never a bad place to go.
Unless it's 107 degrees.
Yeah, the plane rides have a tendency to be a little tedious, but, everybody's got to go down and see Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, for sure. Rob, last time you and I were there, I think it was like 110 or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a little bit much. I took my daughter there on her birthday. I think it was August 2nd week, and it was. I was mad the whole time. It was raining and it was hot.
It's not going to be like that though for the boot camp.
No, it's going to be good.
Perfect weather. I'm predicting, which I can do just about as well as the weather people. But it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. We got a lot in store, so hope to see you all there. But anyway, so moving back to today's topic, we're talking about DataQs. So starting off, for folks who may not be familiar or all that familiar with the DataQs system, I know among us three, we're constantly in the system on behalf of our clients and filing these types of appeals. But wanted to start with some background on the DataQs system, what it is, who it's for, how it works. So maybe you guys can break that down. Whoever wants to go first.
Brian, you want to draw straws?
I can.
No, go ahead. I'm just messing. Go
ahead. Well, I think when they put the DataQs system in to challenge initially it was the violations, looking for the simple violations that would come up, or the simple mistakes that would come up. Maybe it was a wrong DOT number, maybe it was a wrong company name, violations that were put under a wrong code, Initially, I think that's where it started from. But as it's grown, and then they added the accidents or the crashes. I hate that word, accidents. They add the crashes and the adjudicated citations. That it's grown quite a bit since its initial conception. But we still got a ways to go, and I think the steps they're taking now is great. But that's where it all started from.
Rob, how do you tend to use the DataQs system, or have you over the years?
How I typically use it, it usually is an inspection related deal, not a crash related deal as much. But I think one way or the other, your likelihood of success isn't always that great. I think, what is it, like 65% at the most, and 40.
I haven't been able to find those numbers. Have you seen those numbers somewhere? The success rate on DataQs?
Yeah, I actually read it. I guess it was maybe a week or two ago when we first, threw this up we knew we were coming on here. I found it, and I want to say it was like 38% on the low end, 40% for inspections, 38 on the crashes, and 64 and 65, which was kind of odd for them to both be the same range for both inspection and crash related. I almost said accident, but I didn't want to Brian lose his mind. But no, I typically use it more for violations, and it's not as much drivers, but I have had some driver. But it's mostly carriers wanting to get information taken off.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, the DataQs system has been around since the start of CSA. It is essentially the online system available to mainly motor carriers, but really anybody, to challenge data that gets put in the FMCSA's information systems, primarily inspection violation data that comes from roadside inspections. So if I'm a motor carrier and one of my drivers gets tagged with an hours of service violation, and I've got some reason to believe that the officer got that violation wrong, maybe they misinterpreted a rule, or maybe that driver was short haul and shouldn't have had a logging violation, I can go in, log in through my DataQs account, find that particular violation, and then submit a challenge to it, explaining the basis for my appeal, and then potentially get that violation taken off my account if I am successful with that appeal. But you both have already kind of hinted at some of the problems that we've seen over the years. Frankly, Rob, I'm surprised that those numbers are as high as they are with the success rate. I would say, having filed these hundreds of these over the last decade or so, my success rate is nowhere near the 48% or whatever it was on the low end. It's just the fundamental problem with the system as I see it, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, has been the fact, the way that it's administered. So right now, the FMCSA has kind of taken a hands-off approach to the system altogether from the start. They push it off onto their state partners, so state law enforcement agencies. Whoever wrote up the violation in the first instance is usually going to be the very same agency that's reviewing the appeal that gets filed. So if the Indiana State Police wrote up that hours of service violations and I file an appeal through the DataQs account, it goes right back to the Indiana State Police to rule on my appeal rather than FMCSA, even though this is an FMCSA system. So as I said at the start, quite a bit of bias there. But what are your thoughts on kind of the problems that we've seen over the years with DataQs?
I think that's the biggest one, is the due process piece. I've compared this to, I know it's a bad comparison, but DCSE CDL license suspension. So if you forget to pay child support 1 month, and all of a sudden you don't know it, you just don't have a license anymore. So it's that lack of due process to where you can actually argue your piece and have an unbiased review of it. And I did go back and look, and it's out of 47,000 inspections, 64% were successful by motor carriers. 45%
over what time period was this?
Does
it say? Was it last year?
2019 to 2022.
Okay, so a couple years there. I'm sorry, I cut you off. So out of those, how many were successful?
64 and 45. 64
Wow.
for motor carriers and 45 for drivers and 57 for carrier service providers or law firms. That's for violations specific, not crash. So crash is not much different. But just having that bad due process piece, it's bad when you have, law enforcement A gives you a ticket, and then basically you're going in front of law enforcement A to get that ticket reviewed. It just never made a lot of sense to me. I don't see how you have a non-biased process there.
Yeah. Got some comments here. Let's see what we got.
Yeah, the other one that go ahead and do that one.
Let's see. Silas says, I work for a motor carrier in North Carolina. One of my drivers got hit head on by a passenger car that hydroplaned. There were no tickets or citations given to my driver. Which category do you think I should use?
The hit head on, I believe the category exists. So there should be, you should be able to do it on that basis.
Yeah, so I think it's that, isn't it the cross center line category? I think that would be the one where it would be most applicable. But the problem with that category, and one of the main criticisms of the crash preventability determination program as it exists currently, is that those categories are so narrow in scope. So I think on that cross center line one, if I'm remembering correctly, if there is evidence that the entire car wasn't across the center line, in other words, if only the front of it was across the center line and not the back of it, then I've seen those types of crash preventability determination appeals denied because the car wasn't all the way across the center line. So stupid stuff like that where it shouldn't matter, it turns out it does matter. And that's one of the many reasons why the DataQs system is not all that useful as it exists currently. But Silas, I think that would be it, cross center line. If you've got some kind of evidence to prove that the other car was all the way across the center line, you're going to be better off. Ideally, you'd have some kind of, camera footage. But if not, you're going to run into an issue that we're all familiar with here on this call, which is, do you have enough evidence to support whatever appeal you're filing? That's one of the things I found over the years filing these things, is that if it comes down to your word against the officers or against whoever it is whose data that you're challenging, you're going to lose that battle almost 100% of the time. You got to have some evidence to back it up. Has that been your guys' experience?
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that you have to be able to self-reflect and discern and say, hey, we have a real evidence-based argument here to file this. And if you don't, and you realize in that self-reflection that it's a frivolous one, there's no point wasting your time, because even the evidence-backed ones don't have a high likelihood of success. You're still probably going to end up filing it again for a second attempt. But like I said, I wouldn't go crazy with the system if you don't have an evidence-based argument.
Yeah, to tag on to what Rob said about with the driver's license being suspended, the other one that carriers have no recourse on. Now the alerts are happening through the clearinghouse, but when a driver would go apply for another job and fail a drug test and then come back to work and then get pulled over because he was denied in the clearinghouse and the carrier, no. There's no way to challenge anything like that. It's one of those, was he denied when the officer spoke to him on the roadside? Yep. Okay, so be it. That's it. There's nothing you can do. So having some sort of recourse on things like that, and what Rob said, I wish those things were there, but currently they're not.
Yeah. I have had more success. You had mentioned early on, Brian, kind of the advent of the adjudicated citation option to the DataQs system. So originally, I don't know when that was brought on. Was that in a later edition, or had that been in since the start? Do you know?
No, that wasn't in the start that I remember. I think
that came on later down the line. But before that, if you're challenging a violation from a roadside inspection, then the DataQs system was your way to do it, to potentially get that violation off your scores. But with the adjudicated citation option in DataQs, this is a process where if your driver, in addition to getting the violation on a roadside inspection report, if they also happen to get a state citation, a ticket, a traffic ticket that is associated with that same violation, and you go and challenge that. You appeal that state citation through the state court system, and you prevail in that state court. You get it dismissed, or you get it downgraded to a lesser violation and don't have to pay any court costs associated with that. If you get that done, and then you come back into the DataQ system and you file proof that you got that done at the state court level, then it is much easier to get it taken off your scores on the DOT side of things. In other words, really at that point, if there's an adjudicated citation and the state has either dismissed it or downgraded it, the state agency who is reviewing your DataQs really doesn't have any discretion. They have to grant your DataQs appeals in that scenario, and they have to either take it off your scores completely if it was dismissed by the state, or they have to downgrade it to a severity weight of 1 if it was downgraded by the state to a lesser charge. So I've always had a lot more success with that, assuming your driver got a ticket. And I know that has become problematic for folks, with officers understanding that and then not writing up a ticket because they realize that it's going to be worse for the driver and for the carrier than had they given the ticket to begin with. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, we live in the state, Brandon, you and I, that is pretty famous for not writing tickets. And there's a lot of violations written, but there's not many tickets written here.
Yeah, the cops don't want to show up in court to defend their violations, and like I said, they know that by not giving a ticket, then the possibility of the carrier or the driver getting it taken off their record is much less than it would have been had they been able to adjudicate it with the state. So it's frustrating to say the least, but if you have a situation where you've got a ticket and you can go get that challenged in state court, I think you're much better off. Even if it's one thing that we would always do a lot of for our clients, and I think you guys have done it as well, is even if you don't have a chance of getting it dismissed completely at the state court level, a lot of times you could go work with the prosecutor, the traffic ticket prosecutor of the state, and you can negotiate a deal with the prosecutor and get that violation downgraded to something less than what was originally charged. And that's really all you need to get the violation on the DOT side of things downgraded to a severity weight of 1. So we always had quite a bit of success doing that as well. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Well, I know we're kind of jumping ahead, but if the changes to the SMS come through, where the points are much more uniform in the way it's either a 1-point violation or 2 if it's out of service, something like that. Those adjudicated citations, if they don't change that structure, they really won't do any good because a 1-point violation is a 1-point violation. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
I don't think the new review process, it has to be something, I don't think that's going to cover that piece. I think it has to be something, significant matters of legal interpretation for that one. That's what I don't like about the new proposal. It's like, how much are you actually, how much of the unbiased issues are you actually solving with that? Because the scope is so limited to that review that I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you because a lot of I suspect, I haven't seen the data on this and it probably doesn't exist, but I expect that the majority of the DataQs appeals that get filed are not matters that DOT would consider to be significant matters of legal interpretation or interpretation of FMCSA guidance. They're probably more often than not a factual dispute. The officer says my brakes were out of adjustment, but I know they weren't, or something to that effect. And it's a he said, she said type deal. I understand why they don't want to take on those types of appeals in whatever kind of board they set up, just because then they would just be reviewing every single appeal that gets filed. So they got to draw the line somewhere. And, kind of my opinion on it overall is that I would rather have this than nothing at all, because right now we have nothing at all. It ends with the state's review of the DataQ. But I want to go back real quick to when I've got a fly flying around my face. Brian's point, which was this kind of adjudicated citation deal with proposed changes to SMS. So we had discussed this. We had done a show a few months back when FMCSA was first proposing pretty substantial changes to CSA scores. And one of the changes that they are proposing is doing away with that 1 to 10 scale of severity weights for violations that get put on a carrier's CSA scores and moving to a severity weight of either 1 or 2, 2 being the out of service type violations, and then all other violations just getting a severity weight of 1. And this was an issue we raised, Brian, in our comments to that proposal, which is, okay, if you're going to do that, fine. But to your point, Brian, if we have relied on the adjudicated citations option of DataQs to reduce the weight of a violation that gets adjudicated in our favor, now it does us no good anymore because it's already just a weight of 1 or 2. It will be under the new system. So we're not gaining any benefit by adjudicating that citation that we would have gained otherwise. And so I don't know if FMCSA has really thought that all the way through. They had some listening sessions on those SMS changes, and I had raised that in one of those listening sessions. And their response at the time was that they have plans, once they finish reviewing all the comments to the SMS changes, to go evaluate how those changes are going to impact their other systems, namely DataQs and PSP, and see if they need to make any changes to those systems to account for these changes. So it will be interesting to see how they address that, because otherwise maybe adjudicated citations option really goes away.
And, on the flip side of that, if it was an out of service deal where it had 2 points attached to it and you were able to have the citation adjudicated down to something that wasn't out of service or thrown out altogether, I mean, if it's still there, if you can get it thrown out altogether, that's going to have an impact, but it will have an absolute huge impact if you take an out of service violation or citation and have that adjudicated to nothing, and then that comes off your SMS when with this new scoring system. That would be a big swing.
Yeah, or you're going from 2 to 0, essentially. So yeah, that will be interesting to see how that plays out. We got a couple of comments here. Let's pick these up. This goes right over your mouth, Rob. It looks like you're cussing up a storm, and we have to blur out your mouth. I was told in a recent
cover Rob up, the better.
I was told in a recent NATME class that officers have started just giving the violation without the citation because the court can't remove the CSA violations like they could when they dismiss a ticket. So yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about. That has been our experience as well. It's not the court that removes the CSA violation, though, keep in mind. So the court's going to do what it's going to do, and then you still have to file the DataQ to get it potentially taken off your CSA scores. But if the officers aren't writing you up for a ticket in the first instance, that's not even an option for you. You're just going to have to fight the battle through a regular incorrect violation DataQ, and your chances of success for all of the reasons we've already talked about are very low, at least in our experience. Let's see. Mia here is saying, do we have to mail or email the inspection report after the mechanic fixes the issue?
And that's not a DataQs thing. That's just a normal inspection report thing. It's down there at the bottom. You got 15 days to get that thing turned back in. So yeah, there should be
keep it for a year. So I
the carrier has to keep it for a year. Yep.
I was in an audit last week, is why I brought that up. They didn't keep any of them, so they had
did that get written up for that, Rob? In that audit? Yeah.
Yep.
So I had one recently too, where carrier got actually written up in a DOT audit for not returning those things within 15 days to the state that issued them. So before these two examples, I had rarely ever seen the FMCSA write those up in an audit context. So I always said that I didn't really see any consequences for not turning those in time, but I am starting to see them enforce that more. So make sure you do get those in on time for sure.
It's kind of like that's piggyback thing.
I know we're getting off topic a little bit, but I think that's piggybacking on the DVIR versus what's written up on an inspection report. If it was written on an inspection report, it should be on a DVIR. Okay, now. Yeah. You didn't have that. Let's follow the paper trail. Did the inspection get turned in? No. Okay, there's another one. So, yeah,
that's another very common violation to see in an audit. And again, a little off topic, but important nonetheless. DVIRs. And Mia mentioned a mechanical issue. If there's a maintenance violation written up on one of your roadside inspection reports, your driver better have a DVIR for that day, because if you get audited, first thing FMCSA is going to do in their maintenance review is they're going to pull a list of all maintenance-related violations that have been discovered over the last 90 days during a roadside inspection, and they're going to expect to see a DVIR for all of those. And if you can't produce them, it's going to be written up as a missing DVIR, and if you're missing more than 10% of them, then it's going to be a critical level violation in your audit, and you're going to potentially fail that maintenance part of your audit. So a very important thing to do is make sure you're consistently watching your roadside inspections, and if there's a maintenance-related violation written up, make sure you're having your driver submit the DVIR, you fix the issue, you sign off on the fix, you keep a record of the repairs along with the DVIR, along with the inspection report, and you send a copy of that inspection report back to the state. That kind of wraps up the paperwork trail that's associated with that.
Piece of cake.
Piece of cake. Most carriers struggle with it, from what I have seen. I've yet to go in and audit a carrier that had that process really buttoned up, but it is what it is. It's easy picking for DOT in an audit, so be careful there. Okay, so we've kind of hit on the current DataQs system, and we started to hint at the proposed change, but let's dig into what exactly FMCSA is proposing here. Rob, you want to kind of break down what you saw, what you read coming out of that notice that FMCSA issued last week?
Well, basically, from what I gathered, it'll kind of take some limited, some items of limited scope and push it out of the state and into, I guess, an appeals process that you can kind of push certain significant matters of legal interpretation, or what is the rest of it, Brandon? Implementation,
guidance, policy or guidance or whatever.
But that's kind of, like I said earlier, it really limits that, and I think what really needs to happen. And when you said earlier they had listening sessions, I said, or you said listening, I was thinking they had hearing sessions. They didn't have listening sessions. But what I think they really should hear is that you need a process to where every day anything can be pushed up. There has to be some recourse if you're going to have real due process to really fight these things out. So a real independent board that's open to hear anything would be great, but I don't see that happening. But that's a portion of the proposal, that there's going to be somewhere outside the state realm in which to push these previously rejected data challenges to.
Brian, did you take anything else out of that notice when you read through it?
Who, me?
Yes, Brian. Did you take anything away from that notice, the FMCSA's notice on the potential changes to the DataQs when you read through it?
No, nothing more than Rob said.
Yeah, it was short. It was short on the details for sure. And so they are accepting comments on it for the next 60 days. And so if you've got any thoughts on it, be sure to get your comments in. We're always preaching that. That's the best way to be heard. But as Rob said, it's more of kind of are they going to really take to heart what we're saying? I mean, this is our only shot. So you got to go in and submit your comments. I think the thing that I took away from it is kind of what you mentioned, Rob, which is, there's going to be some kind of a board. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know who's going to be on that board, but they are going to limit their review to reviews of matters of significant legal interpretation. So if the officer made some kind of a mistake in their version of the law that they applied to the violation at hand, or to matters of FMCSA policy. And it kind of made me think back at one example of a DataQ that I had filed recently on behalf of a client that I think would probably be a prime candidate for this type of an appeal. It was a Wyoming-based, it was actually Colorado-based carrier, but they got pulled over in Wyoming. It was a small carrier, and the owner of the company was kind of using his own truck. On this day in particular, he was transporting a new vehicle for one of his family members as just a favor for that family member across state lines. It wasn't part of his business. He had picked it up wherever they had purchased it from and was taking it to the family member's house. He gets pulled over by Wyoming Highway Patrol and written up for all kinds of violations, med card violation, all kinds of stuff that would apply only if you're operating in commerce. And so we filed a DataQs appeal saying, hey, this was for personal reasons. He was not involved in interstate commerce. The regulations just don't apply in this situation. I thought it was a pretty clear-cut case.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of a legal interpretation. It was the officer was misinterpreting the application of the federal safety regulations. They don't apply to non-commercial use of vehicles. And it got denied, unsurprisingly, by the state in the first go-around. So I filed my second bite at the apple, which you get under the current DataQs rules. And I added some additional legal analysis to my appeal, and I said, you've clearly got this wrong. You're clearly interpreting it wrong. And they just stuck to their guns, and they just denied it again. So under the current system, that's the end of the line. There's nowhere else to go with it. Me being me, I tried to go somewhere else with it. I sent an email to my contacts at FMCSA. I said, I said it in nicer terms than this, but I said, this is bullshit. The state is misinterpreting your laws, and you're letting these violations subsist on your system, and it's just incorrect. And this particular client of mine, he had lost his insurance already because the insurance saw these violations pop up on his account, and they had already canceled his insurance. So he was literally going to be out of business because of these violations. FMCSA just threw their hands up, said, nope, we don't deal with these issues. These are dealt with by the state. So frustrating. But that's the system that we've lived with now for 13 years. But having an appeals board kind of sit on top of that process as somewhere else to take that type of deal, I think would be beneficial, but maybe not to the extent that we all would want, obviously. You guys have any other experiences like that in the past with those types of particularly frustrating DataQs appeals?
I had one, and we actually had it pretty frequently to the point where I actually printed the exemption and put it in all the company's vehicles because this was an interstate carrier, but it wasn't trucks. It was cargo vans, and these cargo vans had an exemption for exhaust. And they had like a 7-year exemption on these things, but they kept getting pulled over and getting these exhaust tickets. And I got to the point where I basically made contact with the captain of this state highway patrol motor carrier deal. We talked, we got some rapport together. I got his cell phone, and then it's, hey, if you ever get pulled over and you get a citation for exhaust, you call this guy Rob's cell phone number, and he'll get you off the side of the road. Because it ultimately was kind of crazy, but it was still an out of service. So we got to this point where we had this rapport, and you just call the captain up, and it never got to the DataQ piece. He would just eliminate it. It just kind of went away, and you had to get it right there. Like once you were gone, that was it. But even with the exemption, if we didn't catch it there and it got put in the system and you had to DataQ it, even though you had the exemption, we've been ruled against, where it clearly says there's an exemption that allows for a shorter exhaust. Anyway, it's aggravating because in a lot of these cases, like with yours, you're talking about state law enforcement agencies implementing interstate federal regulatory guidelines, but yet they've compartmentalized state agencies to where the feds have compartmentalized state agencies to where it's like, hey, they're the bad guy. You got to deal with them only, and we don't have any say in that. So I think if it's the reason I'm in favor of more like an independent board to review these things is if it's your rule and it's an interstate rule, Fed rule, then you should have some recourse to go to some independent board to argue at the federal level that the state didn't interpret Fed regs the correct way. And then somebody has to make a determination on that. So I've always been in favor of that, but the likelihood of it happening, I don't think is good because, you've said it before, they just don't have the resources to enforce safety regulations to begin with, not at the scale we need it. And, that's just where we are.
Brian, any similar? I'm sure you've got dozens of those types of examples where it was just so frustrating. You thought you had a slam dunk, and then it just blows up in your face.
Yeah, it was a simple one. Business owner was using his own personal F-450 to go get an engine for his brother's tractor. And since he had a CDL, and since that truck was big enough to be because it didn't have a DOT number on it because it was his personal vehicle, they considered it interstate commerce.
Yeah.
And, that one was frustrating.
Yeah, it's almost the same example I had. It's
Yep.
the thing that I've always leaned on, kind of thinking this through on the legal side of things. The thing I've always complained about is that, Congress kind of delegates to FMCSA what its duties are supposed to be. FMCSA only has the powers that it derives through its congressional mandates. And FMCSA has then delegated some of those to the states. And in my view, it has done so impermissibly in these contexts because it's essentially washing its hands of its own responsibilities. Congress has statutes out there that say FMCSA has a responsibility to make sure that all of the data that it has in its various information databases is accurate. And I've always argued that by washing your hands of this and letting the states interpret your federal laws and then getting it wrong on so many of these cases, you are not discharging your duty, FMCSA, to make sure that the data in your systems is accurate. And obviously that's gotten us nowhere. Nobody really cares what I think about it. I know FMCSA has gotten sued on this issue specifically. There was a case probably 5 or 6 years ago that made its way up to federal court where somebody lost a DataQs appeal. And hearing nothing from FMCSA, they decided just to sue FMCSA. And they made this argument that, FMCSA is not doing its duty to make sure the systems are right. And the court agreed with FMCSA. They threw that case out. So it is good to see finally that we are starting to get movement on this, particularly, like I said, now that we are starting to see FMCSA want to make tweaks to CSA and make tweaks to safety ratings. That's the other thing we haven't really talked about, but just within the last couple of weeks, FMCSA came out with their notice where they are proposing, it's an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, so it's not to the rulemaking stage yet, but they are soliciting comments on a potential change to carrier safety ratings, so satisfactory, conditional, unsat, whereby they are thinking about potentially tying those safety ratings to a carrier's SMS scores, which is something they tried in 2016 and was ultimately abandoned because it got so much blowback. But my biggest concern with that back then and now has been, okay, if we're going to tie a carrier's safety rating, which could potentially get it shut down, to this violation data from roadside inspections, we have to have a system in place with an independent review board for us to be able to appeal the violation data, because otherwise we could potentially get shut down by a state's erroneous interpretation of the laws, which just is not fair to anybody. So I was glad to see that they came out with this rule or that this proposal, if for nothing else than that. What are you guys' thoughts on that? I know that's off topic, but I know you both are kind of tracking that as well, those potential changes to safety ratings.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't. Go ahead, Rob. I don't think it worked before, and I don't think it's going to work any better now. I mean, if anything, changes have kind of. I don't think the environment of truck transportation has gotten to the point where, it's going to be any different of a result than it was in years past when it failed.
Brian,
my question is when they bring to the table those changes and how are they going to put the review board together? I'll be curious to see if the CVSA is involved, to see if that if it runs up through that, if they're going to put some sort of guidelines down. You have your out of service guide that comes out every year. Is there going to be some cut and dry if this mistake's made on an inspection? It's an automatic withdrawal of the violation, kind of like the crash preventability program. something like that. And that would help. It would give at least some guidance to, folks like us that are trying to do these data queues for people and motor carriers, having the opportunity to say, "Yep, it falls into this category. It needs to be taken off." So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Let's see what Jared has to say. He's skipping school on us today. He
Oh,
says,
Lord.
lost a crash challenge after the state's questionable interpretation of the application of safety chains when dash cam videos showed the other driver coming across 2 lanes of traffic and hit my he's got another one here. Hit my driver head on. Toxicology submitted, and the other driver was drunk and high. Lost the challenge because of the safety chain. Yeah, I remember that one. That one was just nuts. I mean,
So
what else?
They were chained up for bad weather, and is that what they're talking about?
No, Jared was going to have to explain it a little bit better. That's not. I don't think that was the issue. I think it.
Oh.
Well, it could have been. It could have been the issue. I think the point was the officer said we had a violation in connection with the accident, even though our violation had nothing to do with causing the accident. And then, and because of that, they would not remove the accident because they said we had some kind of a violation that was found in connection with the investigation of the accident. Oh, he's saying, yeah, this. Okay, I remember. It was steel coils. It was whether the cargo was properly secured with steel chains, and that had nothing to do with what caused the accident. The other driver was high and drunk and crossed the center line, and yet they wouldn't they wouldn't determine it to be not preventable on our driver's part because we had not allegedly properly strapped down those steel coils.
You didn't have enough binders.
Yeah, it's that type of stuff.
To go back to what Brian was saying in terms of CVSA, I could accept them because I think CVSA is a pretty objective.
Jared says he almost retired after that.
CVSA, I think, is a pretty objective group. I think I'd rather have them than anybody else. But I think based on...
It's made up of other stakeholders other than just...
Yeah,
so.
But I'd like to see them play a part in it.
Yeah,
but or at least some of their objective criteria play a part in it and kind of advise that piece of it. But the other piece of it is based on how the proposed rule is, the proposal is written, and what its scope is. I have a feeling that you're going to have a bunch of people who are just lawyers.
Jared.
So I do. I think because you're talking about legal interpretation, and I don't see how you're gonna fit CVSA people or other industry represented, other people from the industry represented on that. And if you're trying to get true interpretation, generally when you start talking interpretation, you're talking somebody with a legal background.
Yeah, I think it could be broader. Because virtually every DataQ challenge I ever file, I would classify as a legal interpretation. Whether FMCSA agrees with me or not, I don't know. I guess that we'll have to wait and see on that. But I always avoid filing challenges on any kind of factual disputes unless I've got evidence to back up my version of the story. Because otherwise, like I said, if it's just he said, she said, you're going to lose that battle. And so I always caution carriers and drivers, don't be the boy that cries wolf and just challenge everything. Pick your battles wisely. Pick the ones where you've got evidence to back up your case, where it makes it difficult for the state to look at that evidence and still stick to their guns. And so with that in mind, I would argue that virtually every DataQ challenge I file is some kind of a legal interpretation, if not a strictly, here's what these words mean in this law. It's, hey, here's how the officer is applying that law to this particular situation, and it's erroneous. I would say that is still a candidate for this type of appeals board. But again, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see on that. Actually, one thing I do have pulled up here that is worth talking about is these were a couple of tables that were put in the FMCSA's proposal where they are proposing to stand up this kind of independent appeals board. They gave some examples of requests that would be possibly acceptable for FMCSA appeal. And then they gave some examples of requests that are not going to be acceptable for FMCSA appeal. Not going to run through them all here. This is on our website if you're interested, trucksafe.com. We have an article on this topic. But here are a couple of examples of violations that would possibly be accepted for FMCSA appeal. I'm going to read number 2 here. Driver was using a portable electronic logging device mounted to the center console. Driver was cited for a violation because the ELD was not in view of the driver while operating the CMV. Driver claims the violation is an error because visible, quote unquote, means not hidden, and the driver only needs to access it when changing duty statuses. And then FMCSA says the reason why this would be an acceptable appeal to this new appeals board is to interpret the ELD and HOS supporting documents final rule where they talk about portable ELDs. If a driver uses a portable ELD, the motor carrier shall ensure that the ELD is mounted in a fixed position during the operation of the commercial motor vehicle and visible to the driver when the driver is seated in normal driving position. It's funny, they give that example as one that would be an acceptable appeal, and then based on that wording there, it looks like they're going to deny the appeal if it does happen to get filed, but they do list that as one as kind of an interpretation of the law. One other one here, a driver was cited roadside with violating hours of service regulations after claiming to be operating under a regional emergency declaration in support of hurricane relief efforts. State contended the commodity was not part of the relief efforts. FMCSA says the reason this may be an acceptable appeal is to assess whether the state correctly applied the waiver in response to the declared hurricane emergency. I actually had one of those not too long ago where it was actually the COVID emergency exemption that was in place for several years. I had a carrier that was transporting bottled water, but also Pepsi products. And and so it was a mixed load of arguably emergency relief commodities, water, and arguably not Pepsi. And the officer wrote it up as a violation because the driver was in violation of hours of service rules. We filed a DataQ saying, hey, this fits under the COVID emergency relief declaration because if nothing else, it's a mixed load of water. And your own declaration says if it's a mixed load, we're not going to be nitpicking how much is emergency relief and is not. Anyway, got that DataQ. They got cited in several states for that. We had a couple of the states agree with us and take those violations off, and then we had a couple of states stick to their guns and leave those violations on. So under this new proposal, that would be the type of thing that would be a good candidate for an appeal to this appeals board. Go ahead, Brian.
I think there'd be a good one that we have to deal with a lot. We work with quite a few trucking companies on the southern border, which they use B1 drivers. And so depending on the states, we've had very, very good success challenging the English speaking violations. And then other states, they just won't even look at them. And it's the same argument in both states with a federal, using a federal guideline. And some states take it, some states won't.
Explain that argument. I think you and I have talked about this in the past, but I kind of forget how it goes. There's guidance out there that I'm not familiar with off the top of my head that says that if they're a B1 driver, that they don't have to meet the English-speaking language requirement. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because yes and no. The English-speaking requirement is to get your license. Well, they did not get their license here. They carry a Mexican license, and they're able to converse, but they're able to ask for assistance roadside, whether it's through an interpreter, whether it's through like Google Speak, whether it's something like that. And if that's denied and they do a level 2 or level 1 inspection, especially, if they do one of those two and then write up on the inspection that they couldn't complete the inspection because the driver couldn't speak English, how did they complete the inspection?
Yeah, no kidding. So you've been successful in some of those, but not others?
Yeah, depending on the state. It's state to state.
Did you send me that guidance? I think you may have in the past.
Yeah,
If
I'll
not,
send it
if
to you.
not, send it to me because I have I have several of those situations that come up from time to time. All right, we've got a comment here. Let's see if we can address this one. It's a multi-part one again here. Tom says, the inspector provided to driver in a California citation. After 3 days, I saw this violation on my CSA portal as an inspection report. I filed a DataQ challenge, and they said it was okay because the police officer noted on the ticket. So the question, is that possible for the police officer and DataQ inspector to act like that? Tom, I got to be honest, I don't know what you're asking here. You may have to rephrase it for us. If you're just saying that you weren't aware that the violation was going to be put on your account until after it was done, and then you saw it and tried to DataQ it, then, yeah, I mean, unless you have some valid reason to contest the underlying violation, in other words, unless you have some evidence that it wasn't a violation, then it's going to be put on your account. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding. Did you guys understand that better than I did?
I didn't. Okay. I was lost on that one. But
yeah, Tom, you may just clarify that for us.
One of the things that I was going to throw out there, too, was, and I probably should have brought it up at the beginning, is the time frames that you have to challenge these things. You can't challenge these things forever. So, typically, as soon as what Tom said actually reminded me of it was, as soon as you know, then you need to challenge it. I mean, as soon after the fact, the better chance you have of winning these things. I mean, you have longer. I think it 3 years for inspections, 5 years for accidents or something. But that's insane. No one's going to approve that. So,
yeah, because you're asking the officer to recall what happened 3 years ago, and they're just going to say, if he still works there, if he does, he's just going to say, well, screw it. I don't remember what happened 3 years ago. I'm not changing my mind now.
Yeah.
So.
And if it's a violation for a mechanical defect, the odds are it's been corrected anyway. So I mean, what are you going to submit?
Yeah, that is another good tip, is to get those filed as quickly as you can. I always like to wait at least until the inspection report gets uploaded to the system. Sometimes if you go in and try and file a DataQ before it's been uploaded, it won't pre-populate all of the inspection information, and so I usually wait a few more days, and then once you start typing in the inspection number, if it pre-populates all of the information, it's in the system, and they'll be able to tie it to whatever that is. I wanted to, before we leave here, show some of a couple of these examples of things that would not be an appropriate use of this new appeals board, DataQs appeals board, according to FMCSA. So here are a couple of them. Again, this is a table that was in the FMCSA's notice. I'm going to read the second one again here. Commercial driver received a violation during an inspection for driving during off-duty hours. The submitter claims that the ELD was malfunctioning and the inspector was not provided accurate information. The request did not include supporting evidence. And the reason this would not be a good use of the appeals board system, according to FMCSA, is that the request disputes facts regarding whether the ELD was working correctly at the time of the inspection. It also does not require an interpretation of the regulation or policy. So you can kind of get a feel for the types of things that they're going to be looking to accept and the things that they're not here. It's what we've said. If there's a question of the interpretation of the regulation or the officer's application of it, then maybe the board accepts it. But if it's a he said, she said type deal and you don't have any evidence to support yourself, then it's just going to get denied. You're going to have nowhere to go.
We're going to see so many, just like with the crash preventability program, when that first came out, we were all excited. Hey, we got 17 crashes, 17 types that we can challenge. Then we realized once it was here, damn, we need 20 more to make it realistic. And this is going to be the same thing. That information you just showed us, that is scratching the surface to all the what ifs and ands and, buts that people are going to want to use the system for. I think that system, depending on how many people they have working it and looking at it, it's going to get bogged down fairly quickly.
Oh, yeah, I have no doubt. All right, guys, well, that's all the time we got. Great discussion. Appreciate you joining me. Great to have your insight on this topic. Where can folks find out more or get in touch with you guys if they have questions, Brian?
Reliancepartners.com. You can look up them on the website, and I'm on most of the socials, LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer them.
Rob?
CarpenterCompliance.com or LinkedIn. All
right, guys. I'll see you in Orlando if I don't talk to you before then. Thanks again for joining me. That's going to wrap it up for this show. Appreciate everybody tuning in today. Stay tuned for future episodes. We usually announce those a few days ahead of time. Like I said at the start, subscribe to our newsletter. That's the best way to get up-to-date information about what's going on over at Trucksafe. Also, follow us on our various social media channels. We're pretty active there with all of our breaking news, whatever's going on in the industry, and also articles and videos on the topic. LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all of those different channels. Also, check out our online DOT compliance courses for safety managers and for drivers. We have those available, several of them now, over at trucksafeacademy.com. That's all I got. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.